Hello and welcome to GCSE Focus and English Matters. I want to try and reinvigorate this channel. I kind of started it up and then just neglected it, unfortunately. But I really desperately want to build up the subscribers so I can then actually monetize this channel. YouTube works on a premise now that you have to have 1,000 subscribers before you can actually monetize your channel. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. So if you like this video, please share it, get your friends to subscribe, and so therefore I can upload content on a weekly basis. And what I'd like to talk about is question 4 of paper 1 of the AQA paper. This is sometimes known as the evaluation question. And it's important to understand how to obtain the marks for this question. My feeling is with this exam, and if I was sitting this exam, the way I would do it and what I tell my students to do is try and work backwards. I mean, you've got to think about the way this paper is weighted. It's kind of weighted in a way that to kind of lose you marks in many respects. For example, you have, I think it's about 40 marks, I think it is for question 5, and 20 marks for question 4. The two questions where most of the marks are to be obtained, they're at the very end of the paper. Chances are by the time you get to question 4 and 5, you're tired, you're feeling somewhat deflated, and you perhaps do not perform as well. You'll be surprised at how many students fail this exam or do not do very well because they do not dedicate the time and the attention that they need and the energy they need on question 5 and 4. I mean, my feeling is I would start with question 5. You can launch straight into question 5. It's a bit of creative writing. You're usually asked to write a story or a description. I would always plumb for description personally. And before then you go to question 4. Now question 4 is a piece of close reading of a certain extract or a certain part of the text. And I would then go straight into that. Yes, you could say that by doing questions 1, 2 and 3 you kind of build a familiarity with the text, but essentially this is a piece of close reading hinged around a specific question of a passage, and I think you can do that without doing question 1, 2 and 3 first. That's my feeling anyway. And also, the Red Bull or whatever you've had before your exam is still going to be sort of coursing through your veins when you do the most important questions, question 5 and 4. You've got to remember that question 5 and 4 makes up 75% of the marks for this paper. I mean, think about that. Once you've done question 5 and 4, that's 75% of your marks done. You then move on to the other questions. You should obviously look at your timings. Make sure you allot only 45 minutes for question 5 and about 25 minutes for this one, question 4. Do not go over those timings so that you have enough time to complete the other questions. And not only that, if you are running out of energy by the time you move towards those other questions, you're losing a lot less marks. So my feeling is I would do question 5 and 4 first. As I said before, you'd be surprised how many students lose or a lot of marks. They're just too fatigued or deflated by the time they get to these questions. So let's look at the question. Basically, it's the evaluation question. You're asked to look at an extract. In this case, it's lines 19 to the end. And you will always get a quote, usually from a student or a teacher or something like that. A student said, "This part of the story set in a hat shop shows that the redhead girl has many advantages in life, and I think Rosabelle is right to be angry." To what extent do you agree? Well, to what extent means how much do you agree? And you can go 100% agree, 100% disagree, or you can take a more balanced approach. Make sure you're using lots of linking words, like when you're comparing, like whereas, however. It shows that you're basically evaluating, and it's very important to be using words like although, however, perhaps, because it shows that the most important discipline here is to evaluate. So your response could, well, this shouldn't read could, this should be must. Your response must, if you want to get marks, this is what you must do. Consider your own impressions of the redhead girl. Evaluate how the writer conveys Rosabelle's reaction to the redhead girl. So Rosabelle's reactions, impressions, and support your response with references to the text. Well, references to the text is simply either you paraphrase or you use little quotations. Don't don't quote massive lumps of text. That's just a waste of time. Small little quotations, one or two or three words, or you paraphrase, but you constantly engage with the text. This question is essentially assessed on assessment objective A04. And if you didn't know, A04 is basically to evaluate text critically and support with appropriate textual references. Evaluate text critically. Critically, of course, means to understand how well something is done, to critique something, really. It's not to criticise, say something is rubbish. It's how to explain how something is done and how well it's done. And obviously with references to the text. And this does create a little bit of confusion, because effectively, if you're evaluating how the writer conveys, you must be talking about the writer's use of certain techniques, things like simile, onomatopoeia, alliteration, personification, use of words like adjectives, adverbs, imageries, metaphor, the senses. But also one of the most important things for this question is to talk about narrative voice. Narrative voice. You must try and mention that in your answer, please. Narrative voice is just the tone in which something is said, or the voice that is used to express something. This is how you're going to get the marks for this question. Obviously, if you're talking about how the writer conveys Rosabel's reactions and what methods that they use, you are talking about language, which brings us to assessment objective A02. The good news with this question is I think you can throw everything into this question as long as it's linked to what the question is asking you to. If you make a point about sentence structure, you make a point that the sentence structure demonstrates, it's nice to use words like demonstrates, not just shows and tells, demonstrates that Rosabel is angry or she has the right to be angry. So you link it, make sure what you're saying is linked to the question. Secondly, of course, you must, there's no harm in writing about language and structure and everything, that as long as it's relevant to the question and you're answering explicitly these bullet points. And just because in this question you're writing a lot about the language that is used, it doesn't mean that you cannot use use your insights when you come to answer question 2, which is specifically about language. It's okay to borrow little bits if they're relevant. Don't feel like you've said it there, you can't say it there. You can sort of recycle some of the things you've said about structure and about language. Now, it depends on the order you do this paper. You may choose to do it in the order it's actually laid out. So in that case, you will have written a lot about language and structure for question 2 and 3. You can recycle and use those for this question as long as you link it to what is being asked of you. However, of course, if you're doing question 4 before those questions, you can do that the other way round. So to evaluate here is the core skill. I mean, you need to use sort of qualitative words like, effectively, the writer effectively does this, or skillfully does this, and demonstrate how they do it. Anyway, so you're actually going to read the text. I would read the whole of the text, so you understand the text, everything that's going on. But when you formulate your answer, you must focus on lines 19 to the end. That's what you're going to be marked upon. You're not going to be marked upon making some very erudite remarks about the paragraph that precedes it. So I'd read the whole extract, and this extract is from Catherine Mansfield's story. It featured in exam, I think, a couple of years ago. So we know, if you've read the whole extract, you'll know that the passage you're looking at is essentially a flashback. So you would understand straight away that structurally how the flashback is used to juxtapose the life presented or demonstrated by the redhead girl with the relative poverty of Rosabella. And you can make that link how when we look at the first paragraph that we're supposed to be analysing. I mean, I would start my response with something like, I agree that this part of the story effectively demonstrates the decadence and wealth of a society encapsulated in the figure of the redhead girl. So therefore Rosabel seems to exist on the margins of the society, and this fuels her anger. So I would open with something like that. So if we look at the extract that we need to look at, if I read the first part of it, but there had been one other. Now remember, this is flashback. But there had been one other, a girl with beautiful red hair and white skin and eyes, the colour of green ribbons shot with gold they had got from Paris last week. Rosabel had seen her carriage at the door. A man had come in with her, quite a young man, and so well dressed. If we consider the opening of that paragraph, and we're thinking about the impressions of the redhead girl. What impressions do we get from that? Think about the adjectives used: beautiful, white, green, gold. All these impressions that we've been given about her. Her skin, her eyes, the colour of green ribbon, shot with gold. They had come from Paris last week. Obviously, they're living quite an opulent lifestyle. So all these things about them are communicated to the reader. Rosabelle had seen her carriage at the door. It's almost it almost gives us a kind of a fairy tale, almost like a Cinderella type fairy tale image here. A man had come in with quite a young woman and so well dressed. Instantly we're thinking of contrasts with Rosabella as well, but we need to think about our impressions. So as I've just said, our impressions is one of wealth, opulence, and a kind of decadent swagger, if you like. "What is it exactly that I want, Harry?" she said, as Rosabelle took the pins out of her hat, untied her veil and gave her a hand mirror. So instantly in this sentence, it's all about what she wants. They're obviously driven by these sort of material considerations. While Rosabelle takes the pins out of her hat, she's almost serving and hands her a hand mirror. She is a servant in this sort of narrative. And the narrative voice, remember we need to talk about the narrative voice here of the redhead girl, is confident and exudes a kind of a swagger, if you like. "You must have a black hat," he had answered. "A black hat with a feather that goes right round it, and then round your neck and ties in a bow under your chin, and a decent-sized feather." It suggests, the narrative voice here suggests a kind of wealth and frivolity, which immediately is diametrically opposed to the life that Rosabella has to live. The girl glanced at Rosabelle laughingly. "Have you any hats like that?" Well, the adverb here, laughingly, is quite telling. And she's probably laughing at something Harry said, but the writer uses the adverb here to almost suggest an almost haughty and dismissive attitude to Rosabelle. So you can argue what our impressions are of the redhead girl, and how and why Rosabelle has the right to be angry to a certain extent. It goes on, they had been very hard to please. Harry would demand the impossible, and Rosabelle was almost in despair. Then she remembered the big untouched box upstairs. So Rosabelle is obviously working very hard to please them, but these people are people that just simply cannot be pleased because they just have so much and take everything for granted. This is an inference that you're making from the text here. Remember, when you talk about this text, to use the little embedded quotes like red hair and white skin in its sort of quotation marks, green shot with gold, and all these little quotes that you can be using. That's ticking your A04 box. "Oh, one moment, madame," she had said. "I think perhaps I can show you something that will please you better." She had run up breathlessly. This is interesting as well, this passage. She had run up breathlessly, cut the cord, scattered the tissue paper, and yes, there was that very hat, rather large, soft, with a great curl feather and a black velvet robe, nothing else. The sentence structure here is sort of broken up and fragmented. It's hyphenated and it's multi-clausal, and it has a sort of a breathless quality to it, which shows how tired and beleaguered Rosabelle is, desperately trying to please this woman. And then we get that very short sentence: they had been charmed, full stop. They had been charmed is a kind of not that they had been grateful or pleased, they had been charmed. The girl had put it on and then handed it to Rosabelle. "Let me see how it looks on you," she said. And we're not sure how to take that as well. We think about Rosabelle's reaction to the redhead girl. At first it's kind of like a beleaguered desire to please and to serve. Then we get the bit where Rosabelle turned to the mirror and placed it on her own brown hair. And it's interesting, the writer suggests that she has brown hair and then faced them. It's quite, we're talking about Rosabelle's reaction. They're also about how the writer portrays her. Her brown hair sounds rather dull and prosaic in comparison to the green and gold and all the colours that the white and red hair of the red-haired lady. There's a juxtaposition there to be made straight away. "Oh, Harry, isn't it adorable?" the girl cried. "I must have that," she smiled again at Rosabelle. "It suits you beautifully." And then a moment of self-awareness. So we talked about how the writer conveys Rosabelle's reactions. Here we get a profound moment of self-awareness, a sudden ridiculous feeling of anger. Interesting, excellent adjective to use here, ridiculous. feeling of anger, and the verb seized is quite violent in some respects. Rosabelle, a sudden ridiculous feeling of anger had seized Rosabelle. She longed. So it's a very strong and powerful emotion to throw the lovely perishable thing in the girl's face, and bent over the hat, flushing. Her posture here, she bends over the hat, flushing, suggests that she needs to curtail her anger. But why is she angry? Is it because she's angry at the advantages that the redhead lady demonstrates, the advantages in life, no doubt, or is she angry about the fact that she simply is marginalised, fairly marginalised by the life that she cannot have any part of? She kind of exists on the periphery of. It's exquisitely finished off inside, madam, she said. The girl swept out to her carriage. Notice the verb is swept out to her carriage, like a princess in many respects, and left Harry to pay and bring the box with him. So in many respects, her response is her quite violent response to sort of destroy the hat and throw it in her face is an expression of her frustration and anger, I think, to a certain extent, but also, you know, her placed it on her brown hair. It's quite interesting that it becomes an image of plainness and dour appearance. It very much is kind of a metaphor for her dour life. I shall go straight home and put on before I come out to lunch with you, Rosabelle heard her say. There's a lot of contrast here between the sort of narrative voice and the description of Rosabelle. We get the very haughty, dismissive, disdainful, almost otherworldly voice of this red-haired girl, juxtaposed with a very matter-of-fact, beleaguered sense of drudgery that defines Rosabelle's life. In almost the descriptions of Rosabelle almost seems like an aside, almost like a different narrative to the redhead girl, and you know, the descriptions of the redhead girl and her life almost seem like have a dreamlike fairy tale quality to them. So in many respects, you can answer this question by saying you do feel that Rosabelle has the right to be angry for the reasons I've just demonstrated. For example, you might preface a remark with something like, you feel that she does have the right to be angry for the almost dismissive and churlish way that this sort of redhead lady and a boyfriend, fiancé, husband, whatever, behaves. But you could argue that it sort of demonstrates a wider issue here of the gap between the haves and have-nots here, represented by Rosabelle and the redhead lady. So this is important for this question. You must engage with the text. Look at words, look at imagery that's used, suggestions, things like connotations that swept out to her carriage, the connotations of the colours used to describe the redhead girl. All these, you must consider your own impressions of her. So your opinion is important here. And you can look at, as I've just said, you look at all those descriptions and what impression is being created here of this redhead girl. And what is the narrative voice in terms of how she speaks, how she's presented to us. Evaluate how the writer conveys Rosabelle's reactions. Think about her reactions, how she works hard to please, how she is tired, beleaguered, breathless, and eventually almost something collapses inside her. And then obviously support your references to the text. Please use short quotations. You will not get the marks if you do not use quotations. And remember, this question is worth 20 marks. Anyway, that's as much as I want to say about question 4. If you've got anything out of this video, if you've enjoyed it, if you feel it's been worthwhile watching, please come back. I will be uploading content on a regular basis from now on about the GCSE exams. Please leave comments in the box as to what you might like me to look at. Also, if you have enjoyed it, please subscribe, click the bell at the top so you get notifications of any more videos I upload, and tell your friends about this video, because once I can get my subs up to 1,000, I can then monetize this channel and produce a lot more content. Anyway, thank you for watching.